It is a profound privilege to host tonight's Shloshim. Tonight we'll be hearing from so many people whose lives have been shaped by Dr. Mordecai Katz, including family and friends, as well as communal and institutional leaders. There are so many incredible facets to Morty's storied life, and undoubtedly his legacy will continue in all those he loved and inspired. Morty was one of the most beloved people in our Yeshiva University family. I loved meeting with him and talking with him. He exuded kindness, wisdom, and warmth. His friendship was deeply cherished, and he is deeply missed. One story that I shared at his funeral describes well Morty's unique character. After he and Nikki started the Katz School at Yeshiva University, we would regularly come to him with reports and seek his advice on future moves. And the consistent theme that he repeated in these meetings was to build. Keep on growing, he said. Don't worry about the money. Just build. In our daily Shemona Esrei, we have a blessing that asks God to return to and rebuild Jerusalem. And the blessing ends, Baruch Ata Hashem Bonei Yerushalayim, the builder of Jerusalem. As the Sfas Emes notes, this is phrased quite curiously. Bonei Yerushalayim is written in the present tense. Shouldn't it be written in the future tense? The whole blessing is about the future. It was said for thousands of years by Jews in exile that hoping that someday God will rebuild Jerusalem. Why is it said in the present? One answer is that we're praising the characteristic of God that we must work to emulate ourselves. Many people build in their lives. They accomplish a lot, perhaps in a successful career, and afterwards they rest on their laurels. These are bana, they once built. Others spend their life dreaming about what they may one day accomplish. They're focused on the future, perhaps next year, and a few more years, or after I retire. They are yivneh, future tense builders. But the goal is to be like Morty. He was a boneh. He was constantly building and evolving. This is true in his own life, for he was not just capable, he was curious. He built skill on top of skill, success on top of success, not just in one field, but many fields. He built institutions with vision and determination, low-key but forceful, gentle but persistent. He built a family, layer upon layer, with Nikki as his partner, always encouraging her personal growth and professional fulfillment. Children and grandchildren, with love and joy, compassion, and appreciation. And I want to tell you something about Morty. He was not just there when times were great and the ride was smooth, when it was in vogue to be on board the train. He was building and believing even during the rocky times. A visionary leader, one whose vision and determination not just drove his personal success, but the success of all those people and institutions who were the beneficiaries of his largesse and leadership. Morty built because he was a Yarei Shamayim, who believed the gifts of his life were meant to help improve others' lives. He built because he cared. He was filled with love and compassion. He built because he believed in God, in Torah, and in the future of the Jewish people. And as we will hear from those whose lives he helped shape, even after his passing, he continues to build. He was a boneh and continues to be a boneh, for his legacy endures in all of us who knew him and loved him, and the generations and generations of students who remain deeply impacted by his vision, and most especially in his incredible family who follow in his footsteps to lead lives of meaning and purpose. Morty, we love you and miss you, and remain forever inspired by you. Tehei nishmato tzura b'tzuror achayim.
Mordecai Katz was an absolutely unique individual, always smiling, gentle, loving, and kind. He was brilliant, probably the smartest individual I ever knew, and one of the wisest. It was a true honor and privilege to be his wife. Morty was 12 years old as a freshman in MTA, the Boys High School of YU. The next year, the Brooklyn division of the high school, BTA, opened and Morty attended it as it was closer to his home in Crown Heights. At 13, he was a sophomore in BTA. BTA, Oliver Shalom, was a total disaster for Morty. It was shortly after World War II, and the Rebbeim had just come to America. They spoke only Yiddish, and Morty could not speak or even understand Yiddish. His mother told me that she was called so often to the principal's office because of him that she was quite certain that she had spent more time in BTA than he did, since Prospect Park was nearby and he frequented it. If you want to know why Morty was so involved in Jewish education later in life, you can thank BTA for it. For Morty, supporting Jewish education was a never-again thing. Never again should another child have that kind of experience in a Jewish school as he did. At 16, Morty was a freshman in college at Polytechnic Institute of Brooklyn, later called Polytechnic University, today the Engineering School of NYU. Its students in those days were the cream of the graduates of the elite public high schools of New York City, such as the Bronx High School of Science or the Stuyvesant High School in Manhattan, and 16-year-old Mordecai Katz from BTA. By age 19, while still a senior, he was also a faculty member, teaching freshman math while finishing his senior courses. Polytechnic Institute had a process whereby students would anonymously rate the professors. Morty was rated one of the best of the entire faculty. He was always a great teacher. MIT came to Brooklyn Polytech and demanded to know why Polytech's #1 graduate, Mr. Mordecai Katz, had not applied to the graduate school at MIT. He hadn't applied to MIT because the tuition was more than his parents could afford, and the extra expenses of living away from home made it totally out of consideration. So MIT offered him a full tuition scholarship and an additional full cost of living stipend, an offer he couldn't refuse. He got a master's in electrical engineering and then completed the coursework for a PhD and handed in his proposal for his PhD thesis. Already at that point, Morty loved business, and he proposed to use engineering systems to deal with financial and economic problems. Today, people who use mathematical algorithms in stock market investing are called quants, as in quantitative analysis. In the 1950s, that idea was so far out of the box that despite the fact that MIT had then and still has one of the best business schools in the world, MIT came to Morty and told him that they couldn't find any professor who could mentor him or any grant money that would fund that kind of research. They asked him to just stay, teach, and find some other subject. By then, Morty had been working for the General Electric Company in the summers, and so he left MIT to take a job with GE as an engineer. He got his PhD from somewhere else. By the time I met and married Morty, he was 31 and was already the director of corporate planning at Colesman Instrument Corporation, a multi-million-dollar aviation corporation. They asked him to run a major subsidiary, Colesman Motor Company. The company was located in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, but we lived in the Bronx across the street from Einstein, where I was finishing my fellowship and was pregnant with our first child, Rachel. So Morty, who had previously taken some flying lessons, used his lunchtime and free time to go to the Bucks County, Pennsylvania airport near his office to take flying lessons until he got his pilot's license. For Morty, always a belt and suspender type of person, a pilot's license was not enough, so he became instrument rated. That meant he could fly in almost any kind of weather. Even this was not enough, because when flying a single-engine plane, if something happens to the engine, it's not a pleasant experience. so he became certified to fly a twin-engine plane. We bought a used twin-engine plane, which he used to commute from Pennsylvania to Teterboro and then drive from there to the Bronx. He would on rare occasions fly a helicopter for fun. By the end of 3 years, his subsidiary, of which he was president, was making so much money that corporate headquarters promoted Morty to be a vice president of the entire corporation and to head its largest and most important division that made altimeters for airplanes. At that point, he had 2,000 employees under him for which he was responsible. I cannot convey to you just how incredible that accomplishment was. In the 1960s, corporate America hired few, if any, Jews, and certainly didn't promote them into executive positions. With a name like Mordecai Katz, one cannot very well hide the fact that you're Jewish, nor did he wish to. When our twins, Debbie and Gail, were born, Morty, now age 43, decided that he had accomplished whatever he was going to in corporate America and told me that he would like to go to law school. The LSAT exam for law school was to be held in 2 weeks' time. I said if he could pass the exam and get accepted to law school, he could go. Morty had not taken any kind of exam in over 20 years, so I fully expected he would never pass. Sure enough, he did very well and was accepted to NYU Law School. After graduation, he was hired as an associate at a major Manhattan law firm called Fried Frank. Later, one of the partners of the law firm told me that Morty was probably the best associate he had ever had. After 3 years at the firm, Morty decided he had learned what he had wanted to about business law and told the firm that he was leaving. At this point in our lives, I became seriously ill with a very poor prognosis, so I asked Morty if he couldn't find something to do where he could work from our house so we could spend more time together. He confessed that he had had some ideas about investing, and since the internet had come into being, he bought a computer, set up some screens, and an office in the home, and never looked back. At this point in our lives, Morty said it was time to give back, and so he started to get involved in various charities. I remember clearly how he would make a multi-year pledge, and I would have a heart attack. I would say to him, "Morty, we don't have that kind of money." And he would say, "Don't worry, Nikki, I'll make it." I can't remember how many times he would make a pledge, I would have a heart attack, and then he would make the money. He had complete faith that the more he would give, the more God would allow him to make to fulfill his pledge. As you know, Morty was seriously involved in YU with the Katz School, the OU, the Frisch School, Nishmat, Shaare Tzedek, and Bar Ilan. He was chairman of the Global Board of Trustees of Bar Ilan for 12 years, and with the then president, Professor Moshe Kaveh, doubled the physical size of the campus, increased student enrollment to about 30,000 students, and founded the Medical School of Bar Ilan in Tzfat, hoping to do for the Galilee in the north what Ben-Gurion University did for Beersheba in the south. Morty always included the children and grandchildren in any charitable event, no matter their age. It was the two things that mattered most to him in life, his family and the Jewish community. Once, at the board meetings at Bar Ilan, he was chairing one of the committee meetings. When the meeting didn't end when expected, I went to see what was going on. The meeting was getting nastier and nastier, with board members screaming at each other, and Morty trying to calm down everyone and keep the rhetoric civil. Finally, the meeting ended, and on our way back to Jerusalem, I asked Morty, "Morty, what do you need this for?" He turned to me and said, "Nikki, I really believe I can make a difference. Rest in peace, Morty. Know that you really, truly made a difference.
When I think of my father, what comes to mind is simply that he was the best father, the best grandfather. He radiated love for his family, literally lighting up whenever he saw any of us. Pesach was the highlight of the year when my parents would bring everyone together. My father was very ahead of his time. He married my mother, a surgical intern, at a time when most men had no desire to date or marry women physicians, and certainly not women surgeons. But my father never spent time caring what other people would think about him and my mother not fitting into the typical roles for husbands and wives in those years. My parents simply worked as a team to do what was best for the family. My father began law school with 4 young children at home, then worked as an associate at the Fried Frank law firm. During all this time, my mother needed to be in the hospital at 6 a.m., and my father did more than 50% of the child care. He was always the one to be sure our coats were fully zippered in the winter. One day, when we were off from school, he took my brother and me with him to law school rather than leaving us at home. That's how a 6- and 8-year-old ended up in a torts class at NYU. I distinctly recall the professor calling out, "I see we have 2 new students today." In retrospect, I realize that was brave of my father, but his love for his family superseded everything. As an associate, my father arranged to arrive at 10 a.m. in order to drive carpool first. He was the first man in the neighborhood to do so. Years later, when I was getting married, my mother and I, after a long search, finally found the one wedding dress that worked, but the train on the dress made it impossible to dance in it. My mother decided this was, quote, an engineering problem, and told my father to go with me to get this fixed. My father was happy to take on this challenge, and that's how my father and I ended up multiple times in a dress shop in Muncie. I don't think they had ever seen a man in their store before. He managed to work with them to re-engineer the train so I wouldn't trip on it while dancing, and the gown turned out perfect. My parents also did not differ in their expectations for their children. The sisters were expected to achieve our highest potential the same as our brother. Avi Mori, my father, my teacher. My father generously offered his time to teach me, whether it was math, physics, chemistry, and on those nights when I stormed off in frustration because I couldn't grasp the material, he was somehow always still awake when I calmed down and was always ready to resume when I would return to him. It was such a gift. I am so grateful for his patience and taking the time to teach me new ways to think. He had no interest in the field of English and comparative literature, which was my college major, but he happily read every paper I wrote and offered feedback. In later years, he was so proud of a paper I was very fortunate to have published in YU's Torah Umada journal, and he generously shared his thoughts and suggestions on the draft. Last week, I found multiple copies of that journal issue still in his office, and I felt his love again in a tangible way. During our time together, he didn't talk much about himself. Instead, he was constantly transmitting his values, teaching us about what is important in the world. I watched him treat everyone around him with a smile and respect. Whenever my husband, Rob, or I had a moral question, we would call my father. He had the highest values and would know what to do. It was often the more difficult path, but it was always the right thing to do. Material objects were never of intrinsic importance to him or to my mother. He told me a person needs only 2 sweaters, but education is what's truly valuable. I recently learned Mishnah Avot for a siyum in memory of my father. The Mishnah says there are 4 types of people who give charity. The highest level is a person who is described as yitain v'yitain acherim, someone who gives charity and wants other people to give as well. The Mishnah describes this person as a chassid. As we know from Tehillim, A chassid is someone who emulates God's qualities, as Hashem is described as chassid b'chol ma'asav. Every time I read this Mishnah, I always think of my father. He very clearly represented yitain v'yitain acherim. He wanted to give, he wanted others to give. My father's giving was never about his personal power or status. His only agenda in giving was the good of the institution and its mission. When I was a child, I would hear in shul announcements of recent donations, and I would often hear them announce a large pledge from my parents. I really did not like being in the spotlight. So I begged my father, please, can't we just be announced as anonymous? My father said, you have to realize something. It's not about us. My hope is that when they announce our name, it will inspire others. There are people who have more than we do, and hopefully they will say to themselves, look what the Katzes are giving. We could do more ourselves. My mother told me that whenever an organization would ask Dad if they could list him as a donor, he would always say, yes, go ahead and use my name. In this way, he hoped others would be inspired to give. I spoke about this characteristic of my father at the Shiva, and a friend who was there came up to me a few days ago to relate that he had just been contacted by a charity to which he had donated, and they asked if they could use his name. He thought about it and remembered my father's example and told me he wrote back the following: you may use my name, not because I want recognition, but so that it might inspire others to give as well. Yitain v'yitnu acherim chassid. I'm grateful to my father for teaching us this principle through the example he lived. During the Shloshim, I've gained a glimpse into the giant impact my father made in his lifetime, along with his partner, my mother. He used the gifts he was given to better his family and this world. It is an honor and a privilege to be his daughter.
My father had a very deep love of his family and a special sense of pride in his grandchildren. I am especially thankful that he was able to be with us at my son's wedding this summer. It was very special to have him be able to recite a bracha under the chuppah and to celebrate together with him. Family was always my father's priority. I didn't appreciate when I was younger how unusual it was to have a father as involved with his children as he was. From my earliest memories, he was always there for me and my siblings. He was part of the carpool with the other mothers and would drive me to school, and he would always tell people that it was the best part of his day. And if I forgot anything at home, he would always bring it to me in school. And he always made time to attend all of my school functions. And he did even more than that. As soon as the first home video camera was developed in the late 1970s, he was one of the first to get one. It was very big and heavy, but he took it everywhere in order to document our family and preserve our family's memories. I'm pretty sure that I was the first bar mitzvah boy to have a video presentation and montage at his party. I even remember climbing on the roof of the shul with my father to help him cover the skylights so the ballroom would be dark enough for the video projector. My father was also such a great teacher. He had an incredible way of making any subject so understandable that I would love to study with him and work with him on my homework. He was always eager and enthusiastic to help, even in the subjects he was not so well versed in. Some of the most enjoyable times we spent together were when we were both struggling together to try to figure out the answers to my Judaic studies assignments. Even when I was away at college, I enjoyed speaking to him on the phone, and we could spend hours discussing what I was learning, and he would help me work through my most difficult math problems. I remember that at one point, in my frustration, trying to understand a math concept, I complained to him that I was most probably never going to use it again, so why should I even bother working so hard to try to understand it? And I remember that he said to me that even if I never use it again, I should learn it so that one day I would be able to help teach it to my children. And that really encapsulates two of the things that were really important to my father: education and being there for his family. And in terms of education, he was certainly the smartest person I knew. College graduate at age 20, MIT master's degree at 21, leader of a major aerospace corporation by his early 30s, and then later in life, an NYU law graduate and associate at a major New York law firm. A few years later, he started to work on his own in investing, so he would be able to spend more time with his family. Soon after I graduated law school, and after working briefly at a law firm, I joined my father to help him further implement and scale his investing ideas. I have to say that it has been an incredible privilege to have been able to work side by side with my father for the past 25 years. I have learned pretty much everything I know about business and finance from my father. But even more importantly, were the lessons I learned by watching how he would use his time and resources to deeply involve himself in Jewish causes. Business success to my father was not defined by amassing material things, but by having the ability to give back. And he had a clear and certain vision for what he thought was the best path forward, both in terms of business decisions and for the Jewish institutions he was involved with. My father's communal involvement certainly was not limited to monetary support. He devoted most of his time to working within these organizations in lay leadership roles because he knew that he could make a difference and help make the organizations even more successful. And it was never about him. His only agenda was towards advancing the mission of the institution. It's a great source of pride to know that there are thousands of students, both here and in Israel, who have had the ability to further their Jewish education due to my father's efforts. While I may never be able to achieve all that my father has accomplished, I will always try to live by the lessons he taught me, and I will continue on the path that he set, and always strive to honor his legacy.
My dad was 42 when my twin sister and I were born. That was when he decided to leave his engineering and management career for law school. He didn't have a term back then for work-life balance, but he knew, even without the language, that what he wanted was to spend more time with us and on things he was passionate about. He worked for a few years at a large corporate law firm in New York, learned what he had wanted to learn, and then started his career as an investor, setting up some computer screens in his home office and never looking back. He truly spent his time devoted to us. Many people have noted that he drove carpool, but it's also worth noting that on most days, he made multiple trips to school, returning with all the homework and textbooks and other things that we forgot in the morning. When I was in 4th grade, it was inevitable that at some point every morning he would be back at school with the glasses that I had forgotten but couldn't make it through the day without. I can still picture his face in the window of the classroom door, holding up the glasses to signal me to come get them. When I got older and busy with my own career and started working in back-to-back meetings and facing tight deadlines, I realized with retrospect how remarkable it was that no matter when I called Dad to say that I needed my glasses or anything else, he always picked up the phone and came. I took it for granted that he would. He never couldn't talk because he was in a meeting or working on a project with a deadline or any of the things I struggle with. He always had time to listen and to talk things through. Some of my best memories are of the phone conversations we had on my very long commutes home from the office. Every evening on my way home, I would call, and our conversation would start the same way. He would worry about me talking while driving, but I would argue that sitting in LA traffic couldn't ever be confused with driving, and we would chat the rest of the way home. Those conversations could be about big things on my mind, like which school we would pick for each of our kids or where to go next with my career. Or they could be about small things, like whether or not we should make a bigger pantry in our kitchen during a remodel, or if we should use the space for a bigger refrigerator. He was brilliant and fun to argue with and debate with, and we did that a lot. We ended up with a bigger refrigerator because of his irrefutable logic that anything you could put in a pantry, you could put in a refrigerator, but not vice versa. Dad was a clear and organized thinker and an extraordinary teacher. If I asked him to help me with math homework, he would always say, "I learned this 40 years ago. You learned it yesterday. How can I possibly help you?" But of course, he would always explain it better than the textbook. And in the days before GPS, he gave exceptional directions with easy-to-follow, hand-drawn maps to anywhere you needed to go. His handwritten instructions are still taped all over the house, explaining clearly how to use complicated appliances or how to use the otherwise incomprehensible electrical panels he installed in the basement. When you ask the kids to talk about Grandpa, one common theme that comes up is that he was always smiling and always laughing. The last time my mom took him to the DMV to renew his driver's license, he had a difficult time making his way in on his walker and navigating the various lines. The woman processing his paperwork looked up dubiously and asked, "Are you really planning on renewing your motorcycle license?" Dad replied without missing a beat, "How do you think I got here?" He had a favorite line with doctors. When asked the question, "Where does it hurt most?" he would always say, "In my wallet." Because Dad died in Chodesh Nisan, we didn't have traditional eulogies, but we talked about some life lessons that he taught us. I think one of the most powerful lessons he imparted, together with Mom, was the model of a relationship of equals, filled with mutual respect, admiration, and support. They got married before there was a language around partnership or co-parenting, but they managed to live it anyway. They supported each other's careers, even when it meant that Mom would be the sole breadwinner while Dad was in school, or when it meant that Dad would have to be more maternal than other fathers of his time. My siblings and I and our spouses have benefited so much from the gift of that example in our own families. What also looms large for me in terms of a life lesson is that he focused on the important things. Material objects were not important to him. He wore the same 2 sweaters for decades. Instead, the things he collected were sentimental. You can open up his nightstand drawer still today and find 4 tiny little hospital bracelets, the ones they snipped off each of us when Mom and Dad brought us home from the hospital. And even though he redid the room around it, he preserved the patch of wall upstairs in the house, where he charted our growth and measured our height as kids. He obviously taught us both explicitly and by example that you have a responsibility beyond yourself and a role to play in Jewish communal life. But the overwhelming feeling I get when I think of my father is that of being so loved and cherished. He led a house full of love, and all he ever wanted for us was to be together, to love each other, and to support each other. During his final days and throughout Shiva, the house was filled with all of his children, grandchildren, children-in-law, zooming into work and school, bringing meals, preparing for Pesach together, and just being there for one another. Nothing would have made him happier.
As I listened to visitors' stories at Shiva, I realized my dad was so many things to so many people. Advisor, benefactor, thought partner, mentor, friend, and over role model. I don't think I realized. My dad was just my dad and the last person to talk about himself. Now that he's gone, and I'm having a very hard time wrapping my head around that, I can't imagine a better way to keep him with us than to talk about him. So I thought I'd share what he was like as a dad through a few of the lessons he taught us just by being him. Lesson 1, how to be a giver. My dad was fully present when he was with us. He gave us all of himself and held nothing back. He was fun and affectionate, with one of us always on his lap. There's really nothing he wouldn't do for us. I didn't know this until Shiva, but when my parents first moved to Englewood, the shul had nothing for us to do on Shabbos afternoons. So apparently, at some point in his illustrious career, along with my mom, my dad was a volunteer shul youth director. My dad was a feminist before it was a thing, and a true partner to my mom. There was so much mutual admiration and a willingness to do whatever the other needed. Some of my favorite memories involve their holding hands and wearing these matching sweaters they picked up on their honeymoon. When I was young, my mom got really sick, so my dad changed careers. He moved his work home, carpooled, packed lunches, and went to school plays. He and my mom set the bar for all of us, I think, for what a supportive relationship can and really should look like. Dad's lesson number 2, what it means to trust. My dad liked to keep us close. No roller coaster was too high or too fast when we were with him, but as we got older, he knew he couldn't always be with us, and he wanted to make sure we were safe. I remember The first time he let us walk somewhere without him. There we were, feeling all proud of ourselves when we spotted my dad peeking out from behind a tree. It wasn't hard since he'd forgotten to take off his favorite red checked hat. The thing is, even though he didn't trust the outside world when it came to his kids, he trusted us. When my dad met Yechiel for the first time, he didn't ask any of the usual prospective father-in-law questions, not even what he did for a living. When I asked my dad about it, he said that if I chose him, he must be a good guy. At our wedding, he let Yechiel know he had his full trust as only my dad could. Apparently, seconds before the chuppah, my dad turned to him with a grin and said, "No backsies." And finally, lesson number 3, always be growing and invest in the growth of others. My dad was a bit older than the other dads, and he always used to say that having kids later in life kept him young. A few years back, I asked him how old he was in his head. He was just about 80 and had so many projects going on. He still was going strong, and I wanted to know where he'd landed. He thought for a minute and said, "For the longest time, I've been in my 50s with teenage daughters." It explained a lot. Over the years, we'd watched him reinvent himself, build things, solve problems. Even at that age, he was still in growth mode, investing in his own growth, in the community's growth, and in the growth of our family. To others, I think he'll be remembered for the good he did in the public sphere. But I think for me, I'll always remember him the way he saw himself, full of life, in his 50s, with teenage daughters.
Dr. Katz was an optimist with a vision who always saw the possible and a pathway to get there. He loved yeshiva, and he understood that universities are big places, capable of many things at the same time. You can see it in the multiple initiatives where he invested his energy and his hopes. With us at the Katz School, he decided to build a new school with new programs and new opportunities for students. And he always thought big. He'd come to our meetings with catalogs from big universities, saying, "This is what I want, and make sure it's excellent." The only other direction he ever gave me for the new school was, and I quote, "Add in some Jewish values wherever you can." There's one quote from Dr. Katz that I'll always remember. He used to say, "Don't give till it hurts. Give till it feels good." I'm lucky for having the chance to work with Dr. Katz, and will always remember his perpetual smile and his confidence in a bright future.
Dear Katz family, I'll share a few memories of Morty and the Shloshim of his passing away. My dear friend, Morty, it is difficult to summarize in a few minutes his work and personality and his enormous contribution to Bar-Ilan University. Morty was the chairman of the Board of Trustees of Bar-Ilan University during my tenure as president of the university for about 18 years. Morty and I were very connected, and his special character will always remain engraved in my heart. Morty was an outstanding person, and I became very attached to him. Each meeting was special and exciting, because we have always come to conclusions about which direction the university will develop and how the special project will bring about the change. On every Morty visit to Israel, we would meet with the outstanding doctoral students and learn how to increase research excellence. Bar-Ilan University was initially established mainly in the humanities, and as a physicist, I wanted Bar-Ilan to lead in the field of natural sciences as well. And here, Morty's technological background has helped a lot in planning research projects in the natural sciences. Morty, as an engineer, contributed a lot to the nature of the faculty, which consists of 4 departments, and each department in a different building, and Morty and Nikki also became the contributors of one of the buildings, and thus the Faculty of Engineering was established. The next big project that was carefully planned together with Morty was the establishment of a Faculty of Medicine in the Galilee. The Galilee was known for the shortage of doctors and medical help. The establishment of the Faculty of Medicine became a national project, and the many and special conversations I had with Morty led to Bar-Ilan winning the national competition of establishing the Faculty of Medicine. This establishment, the Faculty of Medicine, changed the entire medicine in the north of the country. I can go on and describe many projects that were done in collaboration with Morty. Morty had a common sense and a good heart. Working with Morty gave me the understanding of why the first engineer in the Bible, Bezalel ben Uri, is defined as smart heart. This is the perfect engineer who is very smart and sensitive. This was our Morty. He had both emotional and intellectual intelligence, and God blessed Morty both with wisdom and sensitivity. I thank God I was privileged to be Morty's friend, to learn a lot from him. This friendship will stay always in my heart. Dear Nikki, you have been a very supportive arm, and you have always been together with Morty. May the memory of Morty be etched in our hearts and in the hearts of his dear children and all the doctoral students who were privileged to speak to him and receive scholarship from him. May his memory be blessed.
Throughout my many years of lay and professional communal involvement, I have had the privilege of meeting and working with many incredible individuals. But Mordecai Katz was in a league of his own. The famous pasuk in Pirkei Avos that tells us to appoint for yourself a teacher and acquire for yourself a friend isn't intended to be taken literally. It means find people in life from whom you can learn, people who can be supportive of you, those who can help you succeed, and people that can lift you up. For me, Mordecai Katz was all of that and more. He was a teacher to me, not in a formal sense, but in the way he carried himself and taught by example. All I had to do was listen to Morty and watch him in action, and there was so much to learn from him. He was quiet when nothing needed to be said. He didn't speak for the sake of sounding smarter or more important than others, but when he needed to make a point, he did so respectfully and with forethought. Whether he thought you were right or wrong, he was always respectful. I learned a tremendous amount from Morty on what it means to be a lay leader and how one should lead a vital institution and how one should conduct himself or herself when dealing with others. But he was also a friend, not in the sense of someone to go to the theater with or out to dinner with, but in the sense of what friendship should truly be about. He was always supportive, encouraging, and happy to help others. I always felt uplifted and supported when I was in his presence. Morty was an investor, both professionally, but also in the manner in which he gave tzedakah. I think it's fair to say that Morty was a philanthropic investor. When he and his family founded the Katz School of Science and Health at Yeshiva University, he intentionally invested in a graduate school that would provide YU with continued success for many years to come. Morty invested in the future, and because of his efforts and vision, our future and the future of the Jewish community is brighter than ever. Morty has left a legacy that will surely continue his incredible life's work. He was so proud of his family, and it is our collective prayer that their continued acts of chesed and tzedakah, consistent with his unique philosophy and attributes, will be a zechus for his neshama. Morty was unique and special. I will miss him very much, and I, for one, will try to continue to live my life by the lessons he taught me. Tehei zichro baruch.
Nikki, Rachel, Michael, Gail, and Debbie, we are so sorry for your loss. You lost your father and your husband, and we lost a true philanthropist and a real mensch. About 5 years ago, when I was recruited to take on this role at the Orthodox Union, they brought me on to change the face of philanthropy. And the first person they said I had to meet with was Mordecai Katz. Why, you might ask? It's because Morty understood philanthropy, and he wanted everyone to have the opportunity to participate as philanthropists. And he wanted us to create a giving circle to allow everyone to participate. And together we built the Benefactor Circle. And I still remember one of the things he was adamant about was that if anyone wanted to be listed as anonymous, he encouraged people to give anonymously, but he didn't want to list them on the Benefactor Circle. He believed that the only benefit of listing on the Benefactor Circle was for other people to see that you're giving and to follow your example. And he believed that everyone should be proud about giving to the Orthodox Union and to the incredible programs that they run. I also remember he had me faxing him every day the changes that we made, the new approaches that we took. And as I told Michael at Shiva, Michael was our intermediary. I faxed things to Michael, and Michael gave it to his father. And one of the things I have to tell you about Morty is he always treated me as an equal, and he always had time for me. As much time as I needed, Morty was always available to me. And I'm so appreciative to Morty for everything that he did. Morty, we will miss you. We have lost a true philanthropist, a real leader. May your memory be for a blessing. Baruch Dayan HaEmet.
All of us at Frisch feel deeply fortunate to have known and been inspired by Mr. Katz. Mr. Katz would sit in this office and create a vision of what our yeshiva could be, and was by my side and those who came before me as we realized that dream. He was gentle and powerful, a dreamer and practical, all in one, and was one of the most brilliant and kindest people I have known. Mr. Katz cared deeply for Hashem's children and made it his life's work to ensure that each of them had a stellar Jewish education. Frisch was privileged to be led by this manhig b'Yisrael.
Mordecai Katz's daughter and son-in-law, Rachel and Rob Sidlow, met in a class at the Bernard Revel Graduate School. When the school faced an existential crisis several decades ago, he asked them whether major efforts should be made to rescue it. They replied with an emphatic yes, and recognizing the outstanding quality of the school and its critical mission, he became the pivotal figure in saving it. But there is another, if secondary, dimension to this decision. The Yiddish term for the money paid by parents to a matchmaker for arranging a successful match is Shadchonisgeld. In this case, the matchmaker was the Bernard Revel Graduate School. And the Shadchonisgeld paid by the Katzes not only broke every conceivable record for the genre, it smashed it to smithereens. Mordecai Katz was more than a philanthropic supporter. He established personal relationships and served as a mentor. To take one example, he taught me to beware of the perils of dealing with the press. And he illustrated this by telling me a memorable story. He was interviewed by a reporter for a major newspaper, which merited front page coverage. When he started to read it, he saw a quotation from a yet unidentified person that caused him to ask himself, what idiot would say this? When he turned to the continuation, he discovered that the individual who had allegedly said this was Mordecai Katz, a lesson effectively conveyed. Finally, I must note that when I became dean 13 years ago, the school was hidden away in two nondescript offices, to the point where many of my emails to the vice president for facilities had a subject line that read, Stealth Graduate School. Now, the school is located in the lovely Mordecai and Monique Katz suite with a student faculty lounge across the hall. Revel is a world-class graduate school critical to the future of modern Orthodoxy, whose debt to Mordecai Katz is immeasurable.
During my years at Yeshiva University, Morty would meet with me quarterly to discuss various issues, usually focusing on college admissions and community initiatives. Despite my pleading with him that we could meet at his home, he insisted on coming to my office. He would come into the meeting with the largest smile and share with me something about his family, perhaps Bar Ilan University or Shaarei Tzedek Hospital. Then we would get down to business. He would open his manila folder and begin to review the measures and metrics that we had set up in order to see how we were progressing. That manila folder was filled with interesting information he had gathered from various sources, other institutions, mailings he had received, newspaper or business journal articles, anything to do with the topics on our agenda. And so began our hour-and-a-half, 2-hour meetings. I'll never forget those experiences. He was disciplined and focused, yet kind all at the same time. He was rigorous without being overbearing. He invested in institutions by investing in people. And I feel privileged to have been one of those in whom he invested his time and his wisdom. Morty lives through the thousands of students all over the Jewish world who he has intellectually and emotionally enriched through his work. He lives on through his wonderful children and grandchildren, and through his magnificent Eshet Chayil, Dr. Monique Katz. A little less than 2 years ago, the Jewish community experienced a terrible tragedy. One of Or Torah Stone's Berem Machanaim Hesder students, Davir Sorek, was murdered in a terrorist act. The day after the tragedy, after burying our student, I called some of Or Torah Stone's key lay partners, and I spoke with Morty and Yibadel Ben Chaim L'Chaim, Dr. Katz. The Katz family sponsors one of the most unique programs in the Hesder movement, the Monique and Mordecai Katz Academic Studies Program. We discussed the most challenging question, one that was on my mind and in my heart. The question reporters from around the world were asking: would we continue to celebrate a spirit of engagement with our Arab neighbors, of learning about each other after such a horrific act? He waited for my response and then led me in a conversation. In our effort to build the land of Israel, the state of Israel, in our march towards redemption, we need to educate our students how to engage the other through knowledge of natural and human sciences, philosophy, history, and economics. We spoke about the need to engage through the strength of character and strength of resolve to protect and build Medinat Yisrael, equipped with a strong IDF, but also with the privilege and responsibility that comes with being a sovereign. Mordechai Dan, Ben Binyamin V'Frimet Zatzal, I want to personally thank you for your mentorship, friendship, and partnership. I will miss you. I can promise you that we will lovingly perpetuate your blessed memory by proudly continuing your inspiring legacy. Tehei Nishmato, Tzura B'Tzura Chayim.
But above all, he taught us what it means to live, to unite Shammai B'Aretz in the kind of person that he was. That humility, that strength, that sense of knowing the big picture, and the pride that he took in all of you. Michael and Alyssa, Rachel and Robert, Gail and Mayor and Debbie and Yechia, and in your children. I want you to know that yesterday there was another Levaya that took place in Englewood, but it was a unique Levaya. And it was specifically targeted that way because it was the way that Morty wanted it. The only people present were the family, the children, and each grandchild spoke, I believe. Is that correct? And each one spoke about their grandfather in a personal way. And there'll be time later, during the Shloshim, we said, when others will speak and the community will come. But this was right. This was appropriate. Because that was his greatest accomplishment. I told Nikki that there's a picture I have in my mind. It's a picture that's appropriate for us to speak about now because we're here in Eretz Yisrael. And Nikki and Morty came on, I think, every single mission that we ran from our shul, and we ran many missions during many difficult times. And they always sat in the back of the bus, and they always walked holding hands wherever we went. And that partnership, which is in and of itself a union of Shamayim Va'aretz, is something that will stay in my mind along with all the other pictures that I have of your father. And Nikki, I have to believe you're still holding his hand and will for years and years to come. He was an extraordinary man who taught us extraordinary lessons. And we will continue to learn them and learn from them for years and years to come. Tehei nishmato tzrura b'tzror hachayim. May his memory be a source of strength and inspiration for you and for us forever.
Past 20 years or so that I have been involved with Bar-Ilan University, most recently as chairman of the Board of Trustees. These years have been very rewarding experience. By rewarding, I don't mean in financial terms, but in terms of the satisfaction that it has brought. My wife Nikki and I, Nikki, I'm saying hello to you if you see me on the stage here right now. Nikki and I have given Bar-Ilan 2 major buildings and have provided fellowships, scholarships, and other financial aid to hundreds of students. These students are our rewards. A rule that I was taught when I was younger and starting to support charitable activities goes like this. Don't give until it hurts. Rather, give until it feels good. And that is the motto Nikki and I have adopted. I can assure you that it certainly feels good when we see your smiling faces and the impact our contributions have had on the university and on the many students we have helped. We could have used this money for investments in stocks and bonds, for which we would have received a return in the form of dividends and interest. Sometimes it doesn't always happen, but a surefire way to ensure that we get a return on those funds is to invest in the education of students, for which we would get an even bigger return from seeing these students succeeding with their educational goals.